Let's face facts, there have been some poor pricing decisions in the past, many of them, but few enraged gamers and indeed the press as much as the $1,199 RTX 4080. The market could accept the Halo pricing attached to the 4090, a titan in all but name, a properly huge leap in GPU performance. The PC market is used to price premiums at the very top end, but beyond that, the precedent is that as you go down the stack and less performant GPUs enter the market, relative value has to increase. RTX 4080 did not do that. And there are scenarios where in terms of price versus performance, the 4090 did proportionately better. That just shouldn't be happening, and compared to the prior RTX 3080, we were looking at around 50% extra performance for 70% more money. That just doesn't work. And so here we are with the RTX 4080 Super, which, and let's be honest here, is essentially the same thing as the RTX 4080, non-Super, just with a new paint job and some tiny spec tweaks which do not make any meaningful difference to performance. But what you do get is a $999 MSRP. Relative to the 4090 then, the value proposition increases, so in that sense there is the argument that this is the price point the 4080 should have launched with. But on the flip side, still a big increase over the 3080, and I do think that as you hit the $1,000 threshold, you're entering Halo territory. But as you'll see, as good as the 4080 Super is on its own terms, it's not a 4090, and it's nothing like that. Specs then, here's what you get. There's no shift to higher end silicon in the way that 4070 Ti Super shifted from the AD104 processor to the more performant AD103. 4080 Super sits on AD103 as well, albeit a fully enabled rendition of that silicon, meaning there's the full complement of 10,240 CUDA cores, but it's a mere 5% increase in compute power over the standard RTX 4080. Augmenting this is the fastest GDDR6X modules Nvidia could find, but we're still looking at just a 2.6% increase to memory bandwidth over the vanilla 4080. So, for review, today we have received two renditions of the RTX 4080 Super, the Nvidia produced Founders Edition and the Asus Tough Gaming version. Both of them operate to reference specifications and, to the best of my testing, produce essentially like-for-like performance outside of margin of error differences. However, in the flesh, they are two very different propositions. The Founders Edition card, from my perspective at least, is a known proposition. It uses the exact same cooler and overall design as the RTX 4080 and RTX 4090, meaning that you're getting a very large triple slot layout with impeccable industrial design and cool and quiet operation. In keeping with the design changes made with the 4070 Super, the new offering is pure black, looking absolutely terrific. Power is delivered via the usual 12-volt high-power socket, and video outputs consist of the standard Nvidia complement, 3 DisplayPort 1.4As and an HDMI 2.1. The Asus Tough Gaming version is frankly gigantic, 348mm long versus the 310mm of the Founders Edition. A quad-slot design with a vast, plainly visible heatsink, but relatively discreet RGB lighting. The shroud is plastic, meaning it feels cheaper to the touch than the FE model, although the backplate is metal. Similar to the Nvidia version, the 12-volt high-power socket is used for power delivery, but in addition to the 3 display ports on the rear, there are actually 2 HDMI outputs, up against the single one on the Founders Edition. Both of these cards, are essentially the same in terms of your gameplay experience, and both are available at MSRP. So let's get on to the meat and drink of this video, performance, but I'm going to abbreviate here to make the relevant points before we move on to some more interesting stuff. All of the data is available in my Eurogamer review. So yeah, if you want to check out those numbers, they're there for you. Link below. I think for $1,000 up, 4K is the focus for this one, so that's what I'm looking at here. But the 1440p and even 1080p numbers are in that text review with all of the bar charts you could possibly desire. Looking at Dying Light 2 first, as is tradition, the RTX 4080 and 4080 Super are essentially interchangeable from a performance standpoint, despite the spec boost delivered by the Super upgrade. But what's surprising here is that the 4090 is streets ahead with a 43.5% boost over the 4080 Super. At least with the price cut to $1,000, the Super presents a better balance of cost versus performance. I guess with a similar price point, the Radeon RX 7900 XTX looks to be roundly beaten by the Super, with the Nvidia product delivering circa 25% more performance. As we shall see though, Team Red does have rasterisation advantages, and it would be no surprise to see an official price adjustment coming from AMD in due course, based on the overall package. Cyberpunk 2077 operating in pure RT mode here at ultra settings with no upscaling, an absolutely punishing workout for any GPU up to and including the RTX 4090, which only brings home a 47 FPS average. Similar to Dying Light, the top-end card still dominates. This time there's a 38 percentage point lead. Problematic in terms of price versus performance for a 4080 at $1,200, but less so for a $1,000 4080 Super. This game is a close collaboration between Nvidia and CD Projekt Red, so there's little surprise in seeing how optimal the GeForce cards perform relatively to Radeon. The 39% performance advantage is palpable, and it remains in the same ballpark no matter which resolution you look at. Let's move on now to Remedy's control, which has proven problematic multiple times over for the 40 series, as it seems to perform disproportionately poorly compared to 4090. Here the flagship is 46% faster than the 4080 Super, 49 points to the better over the 4080 non-Super. It's results like this that hammered the relatively poor value offered by the 4080 at launch. 49% more performance for 33% of extra cost made the 4090 look like a better deal, remarkably so. With the 4080 Super's arrival at $999, the 4090 is basically 46 points clear, but you need to pay an extra 60% cash money to enjoy those extra frames. Still, this is a big win for the 4090, and in turn, the relatively lackluster 4080 Super showing means that its lead over XTX is just 18%. F122 next, and yeah, we'll inevitably move on to a newer iteration of the Codemasters Racer at some point, but for now we're sticking with the tried and tested rendition of the game, which effectively follows the established performance pattern. Nothing noteworthy divides RTX 4080 and Super, while the 4090 screams ahead with a 38-point lead, meaning that no sustainable overclocking will ever bring the 4080 Super anywhere near it. F122 is a game where AMD's RT performance seems much closer to Nvidia generally. The 4080 Super is only about 8 percentage points ahead, which means that the 7900 XTX is offering up 92% of the 4080 Super's throughput on this particular title. An outlier, but they do happen. So that's the general spread really, and there are few surprises here because we're essentially rerunning prior analysis, right? The 4080 was always faster than 7900 XTX, but the 4090 always blew all of them away. At least now the notion of 4090 delivering better value is addressed. I mean, we are still talking about a $1,000 GPU. I think at this point I should remind you to take a look at my 4070 Ti Super and 4070 Super reviews. DLSS and optimized settings still make those 4K contenders. And yes, the 4070 Super is the place to be if value is the be-all and end-all for those looking for the Nvidia feature set. Now let's talk rasterization, where we should expect to see the 7900 XTX pull ahead of the 4080 Super in pretty much the same way it exceeded 4080 performance in prior reviews. Again, more numbers over on Eurogamer, more GPUs tested, more resolutions, but here are my highlights for 4K gaming with the two 4080s, 4090 and XTX. Hitman 3, as we know, staggeringly fast when its RT effects are disabled, to the point where, well, I'd be personally playing this game with RT enabled using DLSS, but it's still a handsome game at native 4K on otherwise ultra settings, and yes, it's AMD friendly with an excellent 20 percentage point advantage to the XTX up against 4080 Super, and even the XT, not plotted here, is essentially delivering circa 4080 Super class performance. I couldn't detect any difference between 4080 and Super at native 4K, but a 36 percentage point lead for the 4090 is clearly significant. Even so, 7900 XTX has around 88% of the 4090's raster performance, a clear value win. A Plague Tale Requiem, a favourite of mine, at a proper next-generation showcase in terms of that lavish detail. Perhaps not surprising that AMD continues to deliver a lead over Nvidia here, with RX 7900 XTX essentially 12.5 percentage points clear of the 4080 Super. 4090 is unassailable. It's a 41 percentage points clear of the 4080 Super and 23% ahead of the XTX. It's a result so high, I checked it and double-checked it, but there it is. Of course, you're paying dearly for that privilege, assuming you can find a reasonably priced 4090 in the first place. On the one hand, the 4080 price cut is a good thing. On the other, it is a bit sad that $1,000 no longer buys you absolute state-of-the-art class performance. Returnal next. We love the game, but we don't enjoy the in-game stutter, something which the benchmark has none of whatsoever. Once again, AMD emerges triumphant within the 4080 class pricing range, with the customary 12-point lead over the new Super. Once again, there's basically no difference between 4080 and 4080 Super, which makes you wonder a little why Nvidia added CUDA cores and faster memory at all, when this is clearly more of a price cut than a meaningfully different product. And with an Agent Smith-inspired sound of inevitability, 4090 is untouchable. 29 points clear of 4080 Super, 15 ahead of 7900 XTX. And prepare to hear a lot more of the number 29, by the way. Miles Morales. It's interesting as this actually sees the 4080 Super score a rare win over the XTX. Only 3 to 4% on average, but you know, it is there regardless. A 116 frames per second average looks pretty good for 4080 Super, but the full RT suite and 4K DLSS quality mode isn't far behind at 98 FPS. Meanwhile, a 4.5 percentage point lead for the Super over the vanilla 4080 must be the biggest differential spotted so far between two very similar products, but still essentially unnoticeable during the run of play. RTX 4090, 29 points ahead, again. Turning the screws on the 4080 Super, we return to Control, which, you know, hopefully you know by now, has this bizarre power-sapping impact on Ada Lovelace graphics cards that are not the RTX 4090. With that in mind, it's no real surprise to see 7900 XTX deliver a 5-point lead over 4080 Super, though I did expect a bit more actually from this classic banana skin test in the Corridor of Doom. The gap between 4080 and 4080 Super exceeds the typical 1 to 2 point lead, but 3.4% still borders on irrelevance. And yes, it will come as little surprise to see the 4090 beating 4080 by, you guessed it, 29%. Cyberpunk 2077 on Ultra. Almost ashamed to play this one without ray tracing or even path tracing at this class of hardware, given how transformative those technologies can be. But it does reveal a clear AMD Rasterisation win, with 7900 XTX a good 18% ahead. Though there are gains for the 4080 Super over 4080 at 1080p and 1440p, multiple runs saw no real difference at 4K, which is a bit baffling. RTX 4090 is still triumphant with a 29% lead over 4080 Super, but the 7900 XTX is closer to the 4090 result than it is to 4080 Super. Final rasterization test, Forza Horizon 5, no real surprises, an AMD win again, though the 4 to 5 percentage point lead isn't seeing the 7900 XTX at its most competitive against the 4080s, clearly. Once again, and to the surprise of nobody, there's barely any difference between 4080 and 4080 Super, and the 4090's dominance starts to erode, though it's still 26 points clear of 4080 Super, and 20 to 21 points ahead of the 7900 XT. You pay for what you get, but with both Nvidia and AMD at the $1,000 level, proportionate value clearly isn't with the 4090, which is how things should be. So we've talked a lot about value, and we will again, but there are further topics I want to go over. First of all, the idea that the 4080 in bracket Super can run the top tier graphics showcases with full path tracing. And secondly, as per the 4070 Super video, to put more basic functionality to the test with a matched head-to-head with the PlayStation 5 in areas where we can quote-unquote benchmark the console. With PlayStation 5 effectively the baseline for AAA development, it's interesting to see just how much raw performance you get from 4080 Super in like-for-like testing scenarios. Kicking off with a Plague Tale Requiem, 4080 Super delivers a 2.8 times performance multiplier up against the PS5, rising to 3.2x if you swap out Asobo's upscaler for DLSS quality mode, which is using the same internal resolution. FrameGen increases that multiplier to 3.9x. I mean, the game looks great, of course, but you have the headroom for ramping up features like engaging RT shadows or improved upscaling quality levels or even native res. I also looked at 7900 XTX. No FSR2 support here, so we can only judge on a like-for-like basis. A 3.1x boost over PS5 on match settings, and on that same basis we're essentially 10% faster than 4080 Super. Here's an area of Cyberpunk 2077 Phantom Liberty I found where we have a fixed resolution on PS5 and a failure to meet the 30 FPS performance target. This is RT mode with FSR2 upscaling and local RT shadows. Pretty much straight 3 times performance multiplier with 4080 Super, rising to 3.2x if you swap out FSR2 quality mode for its DLSS equivalent. Slap FrameGen on top of that, we're now at a 4.3 times frame rate multiplier in this scene. Swapping in the XTX on a like-for-like basis with PS5, 2.5 times increase in performance. Lower than Plague Tale, but remember we have RT on here, not the strongest suit for RDNA 3. But really, if you're dropping $1,000 on a GPU, possibly you want the full fat experience, right? So let's look at path-traced Cyberpunk RT Overdrive in the challenging Cherry Blossom Marketplace. 4080 Super plays 4090, both with performance mode upscaling, ray reconstruction and FrameGen active. 7900 XTX is along for the ride on FSR2 performance mode, though obviously it has no ray reconstruction or FrameGen capabilities. So we're stuck in 20 FPS territory. 4080 is on a 78.6 FPS average in this run, but 4090 is a remarkable 32 points clear across the run at 104 FPS. So yes, fully path-traced Cyberpunk is viable on the 4080 for sure at 4K. Alan Wake 2 next, and we'll follow a similar pattern with our testing. This point in the forest during Chapter 2 causes frame rate drops on PlayStation 5 just under its 30 FPS cap, so we can get an indicative view of how much faster 4080 Super and 7900 XTX are. We have a tight lock on match settings here, finding that 4080 Super 3 times faster overall, rising to 3.1x when we swap out FSR2 balance mode for its DLSS equivalent. There's FrameGen 2, of course, which in combination with DLSS upscaling gives us a 4.2 times boost. 7900 XTX can be tested at fully matched PS5 settings, and there we get an excellent 3.2x multiplier. It's around 6 points clear of 4080 Super like for like though, but obviously 4080 Super has more options. But what about path tracing then? Again, Nvidia has the advantage of FrameGen and ray reconstruction along with improved image quality via DLSS spatial upscaling. But here's how the three-way looks. A 70.6 FPS average on the 4080 Super, almost forgot the Super there, rising to 94.4 FPS on 4090, a nigh on 34-point increase. The frame rate on 4080 is fine, but latency is noticeable to the point where I'd consider tweaks to resolution down to 1800p, or perhaps a move to optimize settings to boost performance and lower lag. But if you want all the bling at reconstructed 4K, there it is. XTX is only at 20 FPS, but clearly these path-traced titles aren't built for AMD. I don't want you to think that a poor experience is all you can get with this game. Path tracing is beautiful, but medium settings is essentially PS5 quality mode, a design target for Remedy in looking great. And if you switch to those settings, we're up to a 108 FPS average, and it's still stunning with plenty of overhead available if you want to increase settings still further. So that's 2 out of our 3 titles from our best game graphics of 2023. Now how about the winner? Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora, an AMD-sponsored title no less. The settings don't give much away, but hardware ray tracing is used in this game. I'm using 4K DLSS quality mode on Nvidia and AMD FSR2 quality mode on the XTX. FrameGen via FSR3 is available, but even without, it's still looking highly performant on this class of hardware. An 87 FPS average on 4080 Super, rising to 117 FPS on the 4090, another 34-point boost. XTX is at a 74 FPS average, so trailing the pack but still offering 85% of the 4080 Super's performance, and obviously highly viable for a 4K experience. So, dropping $1,000 on a GPU does open up all of those top-end experiences with no visual compromises, or very few. 4090 still outpaces 4080 Super by a good third though, but at least the 4080 Super is proportionately better value. Gotta say though, we can't ignore that even 4070 Super at 600 of your US bucks can still run those games and they still look good. You just need to accept a certain level of compromise. But still, value, eh? Let's talk about that. I've noticed that dollars per frame based on a multi-game average is a comparative measure used by some of the PC press. And I like it. I think it's a fantastic at-a-glance look at value with much to commend it. Obviously, those results are going to be defined a great deal by myriad factors, including the choice of game, how many RT benches are included on one side, and how many ultra-performant esports are on the other. Still, I thought I'd give it a go, right? And this table is the result. 6 RT games in the average here, 8 raster. But what's this normalized average result then? So averaging a bunch of averages based on a non-linear scale, frames per second, doesn't make sense to me, and I wondered what to do about that. So what did I do? I asked developers for their input, and this comment in particular stood out to me. If you average 2 games at 30 FPS and 300 FPS, the first game will become insignificant, while in real life, 0 to 30 FPS will be far more noticeable than 270 to 300 FPS, or the other way around. 10 games at 30 FPS will have as much of an impact as 1 game at 300 FPS. Their suggestion? Normalization. Average all the scores for a particular game from all of the GPUs tested, then assign a variance to that average for each card. This eliminates the distortion I just described, enabling a more consistent, normalized cost per frame. Whichever calculation method you choose, both of them are here, the evidence is pretty clear. When it launched at a massively misjudged $1,200, 4080 barely offered the same value as the Halo 4090, and in some metrics it would obviously be worse, something that was obviously the case when we tested individual titles. And yeah, looking at the RTX 3080, the cost per frame values shows that relative value only slightly tips towards the 4080 Super, priced at $1,000. But I guess at least we're looking at something fairer than the prior status quo. In effect, this looks very much like the kind of top-end pricing, stress top-end pricing, that the 4080 should have had at launch. If you're looking for proportionately better value for an Nvidia card, 4070 Super is clearly worth taking a look at based on the table here. Just bear in mind that for those totally uncompromised experiences, 4080 Super represents what you might consider a threshold to making that happen effectively. Just my subjective view, though I'm still team optimized settings, just to make that clear. In summary then, 4080 Super does what it needs to do in terms of delivering the kind of price performance we didn't get at launch. Similar to the RTX 4070 Ti Super, kind of feels that the package that should have been there back in the day. Expensive, but not outrageous, egregiously so, as the vanilla 4080 was at $1,200. Thing is, it's arriving 14 months on from the 4080's launch, and while there is a superior level of proportionate value compared to the rightly celebrated RTX 3080, it's not that much better. And it's still hard not to feel that this is still a pretty steep asking price for an 80 class product that isn't a TI, by the way. And I guess while there is now a gap in pricing terms for a 4080 Ti, with the AI boom I do wonder whether we'll actually get to see one. Still, that's the end of this video, so please do like, subscribe, share and ring the bell for whatever random prompts may or may not appear on your phone. A DF supporter program, join us for access to our amazing community, high quality video downloads, early access to DF Direct Weekly and other content, plus regular behind the scenes updates from the team. Oh yeah, and store.digitalfoundry.net. Check that out for a look at our range of quality merchandising. But that's all from me for now. Thanks as ever for watching and supporting Digital Foundry.